It's been a couple of years. When did you start FanBread? Like, when was the first meeting we had?
Yeah, so I think it was in the fourth quarter of 2013.
Okay. Are you working at Kin Community?
Yeah, working at Kin.
We were introduced by Adam Shaw.
Right.
And I remember you were skeptical working with an agency. The first meeting was like, well, I know I should build my own team.
Right.
And I've got this big vision. Like, how can you solve that?
Yeah, I think Adam and I met. Somehow we got connected, and I talked about working with him. And then fast forward a few months, and I decided to sort of take a swing and start FanBread, and didn't really know where to begin. And so as I started trying to raise money from angel investors, the feedback was largely, you have nothing. You have no prototype. You've got no investors, no team. You need to have something if you want people to invest. And so that's when I sort of realized I didn't know how to build a technology product.
Right.
Like, I was starting from zero. And through Adam's recommendation, we were connected, and he said, hey, here's a guy, he's got this product called Rootstrap at the time. That is really a way to take your idea and put it on paper so somebody can build it. And I said, well, that sounds like, in my head, I know what I want to build, but I don't know how to translate that. Like, I didn't know what a user story was.
Sure.
I didn't know just the fundamentals of road mapping and creating that stuff.
But I think what made you a really flexible product owner was that you weren't tied to a specific vision.
Right.
You definitely came in with multiple ideas.
Yeah.
I remember the original pitch deck for FanBread had 5 ideas.
Right.
Multiple products.
Right.
You're like, hey guys, so here's my idea. I want to build it.
Yeah,
We're like, no, we can't build these.
It would have been
like
like
$1 million in 2 years.
Yeah.
So you learned really quickly. You
Right.
adapted really quickly, which is very hard for founders because there's so much emotional attachment to their vision and their ideas, and you didn't worry about that. You're like, great, we can nix that.
Yeah, I think I think the goal in your mind when you set out to build something is, I want to build the best version right out of the gate, right? Like, I want to launch and have all the bells and whistles. Especially as a non-technologist, I think that's sort of, you think about the dream of what the product will be. And so when we first met, what you were hearing was like the spewing forth of the ideal product, which is not what you're going to launch with. And so, and you're told when you're out and you're raising money, like, just do one thing really well and build from that. And I think I was trying to do the end goal of the product from the beginning. And, through your guidance and through hearing advice from people as I was building, it became very clear to me that my idea was actually 3 different businesses. I think I had a crowdfunding, a commerce, and an ad model all rolled up into this influencer platform. And that's 3 separate businesses. There's Patreon, who does the crowdfunding, and there's MCNs that do the ad piece, and there's commerce companies that do that piece, and they're entire businesses. So so once I sort of came to the realization that I had to start somewhere, focused on the ad model, and that's sort of how we got started together.
What was the home life like at the time?
Yeah, so my wife gave birth to our first son in 2012, and so he was basically 1.5 when I decided to go do this, which was kind of crazy in itself. I think, but that's also indicative of, people who are going to succeed don't usually use logic when they're doing this. They just are driven by an idea and a passion, and so it was super stressful. Fortunately we had some money saved up, and so that carried us through until we started raising money. But I guess I was about 3 months in trying to fundraise with no products. I left my job in September. Basically from October until I met you, I was trying to fundraise essentially with a PowerPoint, right? And I think we have the PowerPoint in the course.
Yeah, that is in the course.
And so I was out there trying to raise money with an idea, and that wasn't enough. And basically met you, started prototyping, found a couple engineers to start building what you guys had created. And then literally had a month left before my wife and I agreed I was going to go back to work. And that's right around the time we got our first funding. And sort of started having a little bit to live off of, which was enough to sort of carry me through.
So you had your own internal roadmap in terms of, if I'm not getting fundraising at a certain time, I'm going back to work.
And this is it wasn't really a choice, to be honest. With a house and a mortgage and a wife and a son, I wasn't at that stage ready to do that.
Right.
So it was put everything you can into this until, you're 4 or 5 months in. And even prior to October, I was half-time. So I already had taken a hit. So it had been 6-7 months, 3 or 4 of them without income, and then the other 3 at half income. So it was already like, was giving it a good run there.
Right.
And yeah, it was kind of the shit or get off the pot moment. And fortunately, it all worked out. So yeah.
And what was it? The fundraising when you had this shit is getting real, and I'm in a real company, or what was the moment for you where FanBread became real?
So I joined, there's a couple accelerator Y Combinator is kind of the most famous. Sure. There's a couple in LA at the time. There was Launchpad, there was Mucker, there was Amplify. And when I met with Amplify, they basically at the time were like, look, we think the idea is interesting. They had the same concerns a lot of the VCs I met with, which were, you have no team, you have no product. Right. But they said, look, if you can go raise another 150 grand, we'll throw our money in. And so what that allowed me to do was essentially use them as a stalking horse to imply that they were committed, which they sort of were, if I could do it. And I went out and raised the other 150 and then they jumped in. So that's when I knew, when I had them, that was enough of a confidence builder to go, okay, I got this. Yeah. I can go. Like, I've spent a lifetime in sales. I know I can use that to convince people that I'm not a risky bet.
That's what fundraising is, sales.
Yeah,
when
it
you're
really is.
Selling services, selling your company, it's storytelling.
Yeah. And I think around the same time, I had found a couple engineers basically who built a really thin prototype, which was all front end. There was no brain, but if I clicked in the right 6 spots, it actually looked like a working product.
And that's one of the coolest things about not just our relationship, but also founders that I get to work with, is the honesty, but also the decisions of going and building it yourself.
Right.
And I remember our conversation exactly. It was like, Ben, you guys are badass. I love your work.
Yeah.
But you're too expensive.
Right.
And I'm going to go build it myself. I'm like, cool. That's great. Yeah. And that's awesome because then I get to have this success story and interview you, and we get to build a course together, and
go through, and you get advice for both, right, along the way, and it really depends on your cost structure. It depends on if you're a technologist or not, right? For me, the economics, like for where I hadn't raised enough money to support that, it was. I think for certain people, it's the right thing, and maybe in hindsight, I would have leverage that. I probably would have moved faster, to be honest. But at the time, to your point, I decided, okay, you get me to as far as you can. And then I'd found a couple guys here who could take what you guys had created and then start building on it. So
what was the biggest challenge with building your own tech team? Not being a non-technologist.
Not knowing what good looks like. Not knowing how to interview technologists. Fortunately, through Amplify, they have one of the partners there is a CTO, and he's very involved in the LA CTO forum. And he basically did the technical interview for me. And I had another couple CTOs that I had met. And so when I started meeting engineers, I did a sort of a pre-screen just on, is this the kind of person I can work with? And then for the technical piece, I sort of relied on technologists who I knew or who I had access to.
Front end got you enough fundraising. So how much did you raise getting the front end prototype done?
Yeah, so initially we set out to raise 250. Mm-hmm. And then we oversubscribed. We basically did a convertible note, and the initial convertible note was 250. We oversubscribed on that, which means we had more demand than we had available in the note. So we redid the note for 500K, and then we oversubscribed on that, and so we redid the note again for 750. And so in that first round, we ended up raising 750K.
Got it. And was that, looking back, was that enough? Was that too little?
No, it was about right. It felt about right. you would do things differently the second time around. I think, could I have spent money more efficiently? Maybe. Could I have done things faster if I had pushed the team harder? Maybe. Like, you always sort of have those thoughts, right. But we didn't run out of money, and we got the product far enough along where we could show that there was an appetite for it and there was a market for it, and that allowed us to go and raise our next round. So I think we raised the right amount for where we were and what we were trying to accomplish.
Was there a shift at a certain point between fundraising and then acquisition side? Where you're actually getting customers, users, partners on board?
Definitely.
What point was that?
Yeah, so you sort of start thinking about, if I raise more money, right? Like, if I were to raise more money, I could do so much more. And then you start getting into the valuation discussion, right? Because sure, people will give you more money, but they're going to take more of the company.
Yep.
And so that sort of right sizes by itself. Like, you can have people who will give you, $1 million for 50% of your company, but that's not money you want to take, right? Or, you've raised 750. I think we were on a 2.5 million pre. You raise 750, and then more people want to come in, but people aren't willing to raise the cap on that 2.5. So it's like, okay, do I raise 1.5 million and the company's only worth 2.5?
Because you have to counsel all your investors anytime you're making any changes
and you need
structure.
Essentially their permission. So that first money built the back end of the front end prototype, and so we actually had a working product. And then through my professional history, I had access to influencers, and I had access to talent managers, and so that enabled me to basically go out and essentially give the product away almost for free, or just give away hefty margins to get the first couple customers on. And that allowed us to just fine tune the product more and figure out what the market really wanted versus what we thought they wanted, figure out how to extract more revenue out of the platform. And then once we had done that, it was a much easier discussion because we could almost predict how much money people would make. And we actually designed a calculator where you'd put in your Facebook number, and we would essentially spit out your estimated earnings on a monthly basis. And so that was really cool to have that confidence, knowing, okay, if you've got 10 million likes on Facebook and you post 5 times a day, and back then Facebook was open and you could actually get eyeballs when you posted an article, we knew that would generate X number of page views. And we knew that if your audience was 80% US, then the expected CPM on those page views was Y, and we could, within a few $1,000s, estimate revenue pretty well. So that's when I think it starts becoming interesting to other companies, because it starts to appear scalable and predictable, which means, okay, if I'm putting some gas on the fire, it's just going to grow, right? And that's really what VCs are looking for is, okay, you're at $1 million in revenue. If I give you $1 million, will that get you to 10 million in revenue? Like, am I going to 10x my investment?
Who were you leaning on while you were fundraising in terms of mentors or lawyers?
Yeah, so I built an advisory board, and so the inspiration for my company was a YouTube channel called Smosh, and they had built a massive social presence starting on YouTube and then Facebook and Instagram. And I was involved in the team that built Smosh.com and saw the power that Facebook had in the early days. And so the guy who sort of managed and found the kids from Smosh and helped them build a business was one of my advisors. The CEO of Kin, my last company, was an advisor. Had a handful of others as well.
This is your network you're going to when you want feedback from a term sheet that just got redlined or a meeting that you just had an investor, and you're calling these folks up and saying, what should I do?
And amplify, right? Because at any time they've got, 10 to 15 companies that they're incubating, and they're the ones taking you through this process and showing you how to fundraise and making introductions to VCs and angel investors. So I think they have their thumb on the pulse more than anyone in terms of like the mechanics and the economics of raising money. And so that was really my primary mentor, if you will, that I went to for that sort of, hey, is this a good deal? Should I take this? Should I counter there's preferences. Like every investor's got different things they look for, and different levels of how aggressive they get with their investments. And it's not all the same. You have some who ask for preferences and ask for all these aggressive things that if you're desperate, you may want to take them because that's your only choice. But if you've got options, $1 million looks good until you look under the hood and you see all the baggage that comes along with it. So.
And did you have anyone outside the advisory group or investment group, basically someone who doesn't have a vested interest in the company, that you could lean on as well? Because my biggest concern would always be like, take the deal, because we are living in a state where valuations are really high.
Right.
And I would be worried that my circle would always be like, take the deal.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe.
What happens to some companies is they overraise, right? And when you
for example,
you overraise, and then when you go to exit, there's too much baggage on the company. So it's very easy to get lured into a VC who's going to offer you a high valuation. So you could have two VCs, one offering you $1 million on 4 pre, right? So they're valuing you at 5 post money. And then you have another investor who's offering you $1 million at 9 pre. So your post money is $10 million. You're like, oh shit, my company's worth $10 million, and you can get caught up in the ego of it.
Right.
But by doing so, you've basically made it harder for future investors, because you now need to be worth $10 million when you go and raise your next round to justify the growth from 10 to 100, right?
It's so amazing how simple it is to get caught up in that ego.
Right. And hey, I'd rather be worth 10 million after I raise this instead of 5, but you don't have the foresight to realize the damage that does to your ability down the road to either raise money or to sell the company. Because people, if you've raised $2 or $3 million and you're at a $10 million pre, and somebody can only afford to buy you for 5, that could be enough to ruin the deal for your investors or for the potential buyer. Whereas if you were valued at $3 million and you sold the company and you had $2 million in funds raised, at least there's $1 million left over, right? So
what's your post money valuation once you have raised all funding?
Our first round we raised $750 on a convertible note, so it's a little bit different because it's not a priced round. And I think so that was on 2.5 effectively. So call it 3.25 post money. And then the next round we raised 1.6, I believe. We had a $2 million. $2 million was basically what we were looking to raise, and then we raised 1.6. And I think that valued us at 6.
Got it.
6 or 6.5.
And then as a founder in your mind, what multipliers are you trying to achieve? Because everybody, here's the 7 to 10x EBITDA, maybe 3
So it depends on your industry, right? So commerce, the multiples are lower because the margins are thinner.
Sure.
Ads and media tend to be a little bit lower. Although 3-4 years ago when Vice and BuzzFeed were raising money, the multiples were just
ridiculous.
Yeah, there weren't even it was just like pulling numbers out.
Right.
Or they forecasted the growth of the revenue at levels that just were insane. So it really depends on your industry. SaaS businesses that have recurring revenue models are going to tend to have higher multiples because there's predictable revenue there and there's a lifetime value that you can arbitrage against. So like the Blue Aprons and all those guys were able to raise lots of money because they knew someone would buy. For months and months and months, and so those companies tend to be valued at much higher multiples than an ad business or a commerce business that doesn't have that LTV and that sort of recurring SaaS model.
Was there a goal that you had in mind when initially running the company?
There wasn't really. I think part of it was the excitement of creating something, and that's really what that was. I mean. You don't do it for the money, right? Like you always hope that you're going to have a payday. The money's there
to keep track of how you're doing.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody who's successful sets out to start a company because they want to get rich.
Sure.
It's just too painful. Like it's too difficult, right? Like if that was your motivation.
It's a lot easier ways to get money.
Yeah, and your higher success rates in other ways,
Absolutely.
right? Like, so I think it starts with an idea that you really believe in and you're passionate about, and and it takes courage to like throw caution to the wind and be willing to quit your job and not know if you're going to have another one. And, you know, that I think that's the hardest part. And that's what that motivates people to do it is I believe in this idea so much, I'm going to put it all on the line.
Yep.
Right. And then I'm not going to sit here and tell you like you don't think about the financial, like you raise money. Ooh, shit, I'm at 5 million. I own 40% of the company. I own like, ooh, okay. So on paper, you like you play that game in your own mind naturally as anyone would, but it's not like you have no control over that.
I think too, what makes not talked about enough, but what makes entrepreneurs and founders more dangerous and successful, in my opinion, is the ability to walk away.
Right.
You know, the ability to walk away from a deal at any point, even a business opportunity, and not taking it personal.
Yeah.
Not, you know, showing your cards and saying this isn't right.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to move on and walk, and that's a very difficult person to read.
Yeah. I think there's that, and I think there's also I just finished the Bezos book, The Everything Store, and I'm reading the Musk book right now. And those dudes are just wired different, you know, like for them, it's not being afraid to say no to a deal. It's thinking about things on such a larger level.
Yes.
Like colonizing Mars, right? Like that is that my little cute influencer platform pales in comparison. So there's opportunities to take bad deals along the way. And I think a lot of that is instinct and gut and experience. But the people who really create things, I mean, Travis Kalanick gets a lot of guff for like how he's managed his business, but creating Uber is like, who knows where you can see why they have the valuations. It's incredible. Yeah. Like it's just revolutionized peer-to-peer and transportation. And now you're seeing the birds and you know, you can see that model being applied.
So you were doing some crypto trading when we were, so I wrote article about this recently, and I don't talk about crypto a lot,
right?
Especially with PR, because I feel like every time I'm asked about it, it's a hit job,
right?
So I just stay away.
Yeah.
So NPR stopped asking me to come back and talk about crypto, which I'm fine with. But what do you think? What do you think about?
I'm still bullish. Like, I just think the fundamentals of the technology and the applications. Like, I think if you're speculative and you're doing it to get rich, it's just like going and putting $50 on black in Vegas. And that's why you saw the sort of proliferation of 1,000 different cryptos and the crypto kitties and like, you know, those are the things where you start to wonder, is there inherent value in this currency? Like what is, because there's the day of reckoning, right? Like it either will be widely adopted like a Bitcoin or an Ethereum.
Or quantum computing eats it up.
Right. So when you think about the applications of the blockchain to industries, whether it's healthcare or banking, you can see the value of the technology when you apply it to an industry. And I think, you know, nobody really understands down to the finite level. I mean, people do from a high level, but the potential that's there for those.
I would say big players that I'm seeing, they don't. They talk buzzwords. Yeah. They outsource the white paper.
Right.
They, you know, Billions had the little Ledger Nano S, that last week's episode. Yeah. Same with Silicon Valley. Yeah. So it's becoming...
And it's kind of a game, I think, for a lot of people. You heard a lot of stories of people who cashed in at the top, and then the market dropped, and they had saved, you know, some money in there thinking they could pay their taxes with it. And then when it dropped to zero, they had all these capital gains and nothing left, or they had spent their winnings on a car. Or they tried explaining it to their
CPA.
Right. So I think, you know, there's always going to be the gamblers, and I think that's what drove it to $20,000 is the speculation. I think it'll get back there, but I think it'll be on the fundamentals and maybe a little bit of hysteria, but not to the degree that...
My big thing is cleaning up the bad actors involved.
Yeah.
Growing up in LA, I've seen, you know, former club promoters, the shadiest people I've grown up with, people in adult entertainment industries to whatever, all jump in crypto.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to do business with these people.
Right.
I don't want to be at a meetup with them.
Yeah.
So for me to be building, because we've been pushed down this path of like, oh, you should build a blockchain dev company.
Right.
And I'm like, I don't want to deal with clients I have to be worried about like not paying me.
Right.
And that's what you have to
or
risk.
paying you in monopoly money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And paying me in their token. And I'm like, monopoly money. So I'd say I'm still very excited about the use cases, the possibilities, but FanBread.
Yeah.
What did you do to stay as high performance CEO, optimizing your body, mind, health during that time?
I think having the ability to go see my family whenever I wanted, in a way that you don't in a corporate job, was actually really good for me. I mean, I got to spend a lot of time with my son. I would, obviously I'm working hard every day, but I was my own boss. And when I wanted to go spend time with my wife and my son, I did it. And part of that is just knowing that you can, not that you're just mailing it in and hanging out at home every day. But I think you have to maintain that balance. At least I do personally. Like some people are wired differently, but for me, what kept me motivated and kept me fulfilled was having the balance of going in and working hard every day, but also spending quality time with my son on the weekends and my wife and checking out to a certain degree, at least while they're awake. And then, you get back online at night, and that can be somewhat taboo, right? Yep. Like I sat next to people at Amplify who slept there half the time. And I just, for me, that wasn't how I could do it.
It's not sustainable.
Yeah.
I don't know where this trend of not sleeping is cool.
Yeah. And I think it also depends where you are in your life, right? If you're 23 and you have no expenses, or you have limited expenses, or you live at home, you've got a different set of values and priorities than you do when you're a married guy with a mortgage and newborn. So for me, it was really important to strike that balance. And there's no right or wrong answer. It's like, what's right for you? If you can work 18-hour days and do that with a family, like that's your prerogative. If it works for you and your family, then who am I to judge? But for me, it was very important to make sure I balanced that for the health of my marriage and for the relationship with my son. And
what were the best life hacks or growth hacks you developed during that time?
I think traveling, the FaceTime and Skype when you're traveling is great. In terms of balancing work, I would drop my son off in the morning, so I got to see him every day. I dropped him at preschool, and then some nights I didn't see him. Some nights I maybe saw him for 10, 15 minutes before I went to sleep. So having the mornings with my son, being able to spend from 5:30 to 7:30, 8 with him, and then drop him at school and then go to work for the day, that was great. And then with my wife, having date nights and doing the things to make sure you're taking care of that part of your life as well. So the vacations definitely went. we hit the pause button on those because there's not a lot of discretionary.
So no vacation.
I mean,
But then you had a really good one when you sold the company.
Yeah, or I'd piggyback on family vacations where expenses were covered and that sort of helped. But it mostly staycations and things that staying with family and stuff like that. So,
sweet.
Yeah.
Talk about the deal for a second.
Yeah.
Well, most people don't even get an opportunity to sell a company.
Right.
But I also think most people don't understand what's involved or the surprises that come with selling a company.
Definitely.
Tell me a little bit about it when that happened.
We had raised 2 rounds, a convertible note and then a priced round, and we were out trying to raise a Series A, right? So we set out initially, we had a board at that time with our largest investor, VC, and the fundamentals were there, right? We were doing, I think, 120 to 150 a month in revenue when we went out to raise. And so that's a run rate, you're over $1 million. And so raising at $5 million, we're trying to raise $5 million. maybe it was a little aggressive, but based on the comps we were seeing, it felt right. And we were growing, so it was 120 or 150 when we went out to raise, but it was growing. So we went out to raise, and then the market sort of soured to the influencer space in terms of fundraising.
Majorly saturated.
Everybody and their brother had an influencer business. Niche was out there. They got acquired by Twitter. All the YouTube networks were starting to falter a little bit. Maker and Fullscreen had great outcomes. I think Style Hall did. But I think the others were trying to figure out their footing. And so all those signals to the market. And there was also sort of this fear of winter is coming. You heard that a lot right when we were raising, which is never good. And part of it was sort of the play on Game of Thrones, but part of it is the good times are over. There's a correction coming, and there was a kind of a minor correction, but it lasted 6 months and has largely sort of been irrelevant. But when we were raising, you were hearing a lot of that, and so it became very clear that $5 million was not going to happen. And so then we said, okay, well, let's go try. And we tested with a couple VCs early just to see if that felt right. And then when we got pushback, we said, okay, let's go raise 2 or 3, right? Let's just change what our message is going out there. So we updated all our decks and went out and said, hey, we're raising 2 or 3, right? And through that process, like I was saying earlier, some VCs give you terms you want. Some are super aggressive. So the money was there for 3, but it was under terms that were pretty excruciating. And so going through that process, we were
at this point, how much have you raised to date?
So we had raised just under $3 million.
Just under $3 million.
Yeah.
So now another $3 million.
Correct.
And this is Series A.
It was a Series A.
Okay.
And at the time there were, and I think this still is the case, but it was called a post-seed round. So we did a convertible note, which was like friends and family, it's called. And then we did a seed round or a pre-seed.
Yep.
And then when you get into the 2 to 4, at that time it was called post-seed. And so initially we went out to raise 5, which is kind of an A.
Oh, got it.
And it's all very subjective and like the amounts vary by VC. But then we settled in that post-seed range where, we had already done 2 rounds. You're giving up, 20 to 30% a round potentially. So you're starting to get more and more diluted. And so through that process, we had a couple commitments, but under terms that were less than favorable. And then one of the VCs I met with in San Francisco said, hey, one of my portfolio companies is actually looking to acquire a business like yours right now. You should meet with the CEO. I said, all right, well, I'm not really looking to sell, but I'm not getting the terms I want. The market's souring. I'll take the meeting. And so I went and I met with the CEO of the company that ended up acquiring us, and she immediately got what we were doing. Our business was very dependent on Facebook at the time, and they had built a lot of expertise in building the media business on Facebook, and they owned and operated a bunch of Facebook games, and they work with a bunch of different Facebook media companies like Zynga and others, and so it just felt right, and the price was right.
Do you talk numbers this first meeting?
No. Yeah, we had. I think I flew up there 2 or 3 more times. Okay. And then they issued a term sheet, and so you get. This is one of the learnings I think is you get the term sheet, and you're like, fuck yeah, this is amazing. Like this is great, right? And you think that the term sheet that's put in front of you is where you're going to end up at the end. There's something called a retrading, which I was sort of warned about going in. When I first got the term sheet, I took it back to Amplify, and they were like, yeah, just recognize that this is not how it's going to end up, right? The terms that are in the term sheet are going to be different than what you sign 2 months from now when you go through diligence and all that. So,
and are you profitable at this point?
No, we're not.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not profitable.
Community adjusted EBITDA?
Yeah, I wish. And we had done a bridge to sort of get through the sale and the fundraise. So we raised, I think, about $250,000 from our existing investors.
Okay.
Knowing that to have any leverage in the negotiation, we couldn't be on fumes. Because if we were on fumes, like they'll just wait and pick up the scraps, basically. And so went into that negotiation, had a term sheet, started diligence, and then I get a phone call, and it happened once. We're like, oh, well, now that we've looked under the hood, the financials are a little different than what we'd assumed, so we're changing the terms. And we're like, all right, it is what it is, not too major. And then we negotiate and go through diligence for another month. They call clients, they talk to our VCs, they do all that sort of thing, and then you get to the tail end, and I think it was the day before we were scheduled to sign, and I get a call from the guy who was doing the deal, and he's like, you're going to want to sit down for this. And it was just another iteration of, and we almost walked from the deal, and our VCs were like, no, this is not happening. So we negotiated, and we got to a place that we were all comfortable with. Certainly not where we started when we signed the term sheet, but enough to sort of get through the deal and have everybody on paper be a winner. And so yeah, it's humbling going through that. And it was the hardest part. It was probably the hardest thing for me professionally in my career, more so than building a business in some ways, because it's so intense for a month and the stakes are so high because you're
telling a story and the numbers need to align with that story.
Yeah.
Because as natural-born storytellers, we're going to tell a really good story.
Right. I think it's more a tactic to get a good deal when you're buying a company. Right. And companies will leverage that in different ways. And that's painful, right? Like going through that is painful, especially when you've signed a term sheet basically saying, all right, I'm not going to talk to anyone else.
Right.
But that's under this sort of assumption that what you're signing is where you're going to end up. And then that changes. And you've sort of pulled yourself off the table for any other potential acquirers. So.
And is your thought, I get an acquisition under my belt, I've got a seat at the table, I can pretty much do whatever I want at this point now? Keeping in mind, it's 3 years. Not a long time to build,
Yeah. So there's an earn-out, right? So usually when you're acquired, they want to keep the team there. And
you didn't have an earn-out?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And basically all the senior team members did, and then there was another pool for sort of the rank and file employees who weren't, VP level or above.
Right.
And so, that earn-out, I think, was 18 months. And one of the other things you learn is, and the earn-out was great, right? Like all of our VCs got a premium on their investment in the new company's stock. And the employees all got sort of, plans, 18-month plans that were going to be really good for them financially. And so you're like, all right, cool. I didn't get $5 million in my pocket up front, but there's a path to like making some money here.
Right.
And I've done right by my investors and I've done right by my team. And then you get into the reality of like, now you belong to someone else.
Yeah.
And that when you've built your own thing and now you're on someone else's agenda, it's painful. And there's also, the chemistry between you and your new boss, and are your visions aligned, and there's all those sort of things. So
it's been probably the scariest thing for me is getting locked up in an earn-out for 2 or 3 years if I were to sell.
Yeah.
I don't know. I
mean, anybody who's acquiring,
I think I'm difficult enough as it is to be a boss. I don't even know what it would be like to work for somebody else.
Yeah, it's tricky. I had worked for people up until I started FanBread, so I had that experience, and that wasn't scary to me. But certainly when your vision for the company differs from that of the company who acquired you, there's naturally frustration.
And you have an incentive to keep everybody in the game as long as possible.
Right.
So even if your vision is not aligned with your new company's leadership, you have to make sure that people stay.
Well, they all had their own incentives. I made it about 6 months and then decided, I was ready to move on. But the rest of the team's still there, and they stayed for the full 18 months, and I meet up with them, and we reminisce about the glory days and how things were good. But it's been great for everybody financially. They're stoked. They worked at a company for 2.5 years and now have down payments on houses, and and that's saying something in LA. So
that is definitely saying something in LA.
So it was good. It wasn't, when people hear that I sold a company, I'm quick to say that it was a single, not a grand slam.
Right.
But it was good. It was, like you said, it was a win under my belt. I walked away from it with my head held high, and all of my investors have said, when you're ready to start your next thing, we'll be your first money in. So,
and it was your first company.
Yeah. So it's good. It gives you, when you're fundraising, some of the top questions you're asked are, who's your team and what's their pedigree or their resume, where they go to school. Have you done this before, right? Like, what companies have you, and you tend to dismiss that as a first-time founder. You're like, oh, screw you. Like, what does that matter? Like, I'm going to make this shit happen. But having gone through it, if I was sitting in their seat, the value of that experience it's incredible and immeasurable. And I see why they ask that question, because when you've gone through that from start to finish, my hair is a lot grayer than when you met me the first time. So yeah.
All right. I'm going to ask a bunch of crazy random questions. Okay. What is the scariest thing about being a dad right now? Traffic.
My kids on sidewalks around traffic, because they're just unpredictable.
Yeah.
That's probably the thing that makes me nervous, especially with my 2-year-old. I have a 2-year-old now and a 6-year-old. You just, you have to be on edge when you're near cars, because there's no second chances. So,
what is the wackiest technology that you've seen recently?
I really like Bird. I find myself coming up with ideas for the challenges that they're having. So if you think about Bird is basically an it's like Uber but with motorized scooters, and they're huge in Venice where I work.
But they're like $100 million now, right?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. But their challenge is people leave them in the middle of the sidewalk, right, on the side, and it's a hazard. And so I've started thinking through, well, how do they prevent that? And so I've come up with this idea of sort of geofencing a 3x3 foot invisible square on the sidewalk, and they set them up all over the town. They could set them up in front of businesses, and businesses probably would like that because it's foot traffic right to their door. And as long as the scooter's in that square, you can stop paying.
Yep.
To make sure like you're off the sidewalk. So.
And are you? Right? Do you have to wear a helmet now?
You have to, but again, like what's the enforcement there?
I don't think the law says it, but I see
they're giving
cops,
tickets in Santa Monica.
Giving tickets.
Yeah. So that's the other thing is like nobody wants to carry a helmet around with them all day. So I think in urban areas it's easier because you just have one at your desk. So if you want to go get lunch, you just throw on your helmet.
Sure.
But I go for runs, and I used to run 1.5 miles one way, and then 1.5 miles back if I wanted to do 3 miles. And now with Bird, I'll run 3 miles, and I'll find a bird, and then I'll cruise home. It's a nice way to wind down after my runs.
And then they sweep it at the end of the night, right?
Yeah, they come and pick them up. But there's no helmet, so I'm sort of risking a ticket.
I think there's opportunities to create services for Bird.
Totally, yeah.
Favorite TV show?
What did we just finish? We just finished season 7 of Homeland, my wife and I. We like that one. There's 13 Reasons Why. It's pretty good. It's on Netflix. Season 2 starting. What is the one? I'm watching the Netflix one on the commune up in Oregon.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yep.
I liked this documentary so much that I went on Facebook and Twitter and recommended it. It's called Icarus.
Okay.
And it's about sort of doping in the cycling world.
Yeah, I saw it.
And it sort of leads into the sort of Russian Olympic doping.
Yep.
Incredible movie.
He actually performed worse on testosterone than he did naturally.
Right. Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah. So, and then Westworld, we're getting ready to start.
Cool. Favorite surf spot?
My home break is down in San Diego. I learned to surf at D Street. That's probably one of my favorites just because of the nostalgia. Also went to Nicaragua to a break called Colorado's with a bunch of buddies, and that was incredible. So,
favorite cryptocurrency?
I have one called Block V. I have another called Block Mason, Ethereum.
Spank coin?
No.
No Spank?
I don't have Spank. I don't know if I want to know what that is. Ethereum, Cash, Bitcoin. Litecoin. I think the big ones that have use cases are the ones that are less risky. I have a couple speculative, but it's small.
Cool.
It's like, hey, if it happens, great. If not, it's not going to hurt.
Favorite movie of all time?
You know, I really liked Amadeus when I was like 10 years old, and I haven't seen it in like 30 years. That was really good. Recently, I like Syriana a lot. That's not that recent, but I like those kind of movies. Yeah.
Awesome to have you on the show.
Good to be here.
Excited to be launching our course. Details on the page below. Keep crushing it, man. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now with Stack.
Yeah, so I just celebrated my 1-year anniversary.
Congrats.
Thank you. Joined as the Chief Revenue Officer, and Stack Commerce is basically a native commerce platform. So we power commerce for 750 of the top publishers in the world, and source goods for their audiences. And then we've got a content studio that makes videos and writes articles about those products. And then we rely on our publishers to essentially push those articles out into the wild and those videos. And then we share the revenue that those products generate.
Very cool. Yeah. So stackcommerce.com, and maybe you
we're hiring. Yeah, take a look.
Hiring and get some cool looking swag like Karl's got.
Exactly.
All right. Thanks, man.
Good to see you.